The navigator sits calmly, eyes shifting between sky and water. They do not rush. The journey is not merely a means to reach a destination, it is an experience of trust in nature's quiet guidance. Above them, constellations move slowly. Ahead, the gleam of water reflects their light. Around them, the world rests in peaceful stillness. The journey continues through the night, each moment shaped by calm focus and gratitude for the sky's steady presence. When dawn finally arrives, coloring the horizon in soft shades of rose and gold, the traveler feels not exhaustion, but fulfillment. They have followed the stars. The stars have led them well. Though modern tools have replaced celestial navigation in everyday travel, the stars still hold the same positions they did centuries ago. They still rise in the east and drift westward. They still anchor direction. They still reflect gently across the Atlantic waters. And their stories remain. To this day, if one stands along the coastline at night, far from city lights, and looks upward, the sky reveals its ancient patterns. The same stars that guided early maritime travelers still shine with timeless steadiness. They remind us of a world where movement was slow, travel was thoughtful, night was a friend rather than a mystery, and navigation was a partnership between humans and the heavens. The early navigators who learned to read the sky left behind no written manuals, no carved instructions. They left something far more enduring. A legacy of humility, patience, and trust in the natural world. Their footsteps may be long gone. Their canoes may no longer glide along quiet nighttime waters, but their wisdom remains etched into the coastline's memory. Woven into the tides, reflected in gentle waves, and whispered in the starlit sky. Those who follow the stars follow a tradition older than any map, a tradition shaped not by urgency, but by calm observation, not by ambition, but by connection, not by fear, but by trust. And the stars, faithful as ever, continue to shine, waiting patiently for anyone who chooses to look upward and listen. Long before coastal cities grew bustling and bright, long before fishing boats lined docks or seafood markets opened at dawn, the earliest communities along the Atlantic shoreline lived in harmony with the rhythms of the sea. They were not defined by what they owned, but by what they understood. Cycles of tides, habits of migrating fish, patterns in the movement of waves, and the language of the wind across the water. These communities were built not from stone or timber alone, but from connection. Connection to the land, to each other, and to the endless shoreline that stretched like a ribbon between worlds. They were gatherers of the sea, people who watched, listened, learned, and touched the coastal world with deep respect. This is their story, quiet, timeless, and shaped by the steady heartbeat of the tides. The Atlantic coastline of early America was a world of gentle transitions. Marshlands blended into tidal rivers. Dunes softened into beaches. Forests pressed close to inlets where fresh water met salt. At certain times of day, the coastline looked almost unchanged for miles, a calm stretch of sand and water. But to those who lived there, every detail held meaning. The color of the water revealed whether the tide was turning. The scent of the air signaled shifts in weather. The behavior of seabirds foretold the arrival of fish. The movement of marsh grasses showed the pull of hidden currents. These early communities could stand silently on the shore and read the sea as easily as one might read a familiar book. The coastline was their home, their pantry, their guide, and their teacher. People did not simply live near the water, they lived with it. Morning along the coast began not with clocks, but with the tides. As dawn stretched across the sky, families rose with the soft glow of early light. In many seasons, the morning tide brought opportunities. Shellfish revealed themselves as the water retreated. Small fish gathered near the shore, darting through shallow, clear shallows. Seaweed washed in fresh, still glistening from the night's waves. Driftwood, useful for fires or tool making, rested on the sand. Gatherers moved quietly, carrying shallow baskets woven from reeds. Children followed their parents, learning through imitation how to lift stones gently, how to check for living creatures, how to take only what was needed. There was no rush. The sea offered its gifts slowly. The light grew brighter, and the coastline breathed into another day. The rhythmic hush of waves created a peaceful backdrop for the morning's work. Steady, soothing, infinite. One of the oldest practices along the Atlantic coast was the gathering of shellfish. Clams, mussels, oysters, and other small creatures thrived in shallow waters and mudflats. Communities relied on them not only for sustenance, but for materials, shells used in tools, adornment, or storytelling ceremonies. Gathering shellfish required careful attention. Clams revealed themselves through tiny air bubbles rising from the sand. Mussels clustered on rocks exposed at low tide. Oysters nestled in shallow, brackish waters where river met sea. Gatherers learned to move slowly, their feet feeling the underwater ground. They worked in pairs or groups, speaking softly or not at all. The activity was meditative, a motion repeated across generations with unbroken rhythm. When baskets filled, they were carried back to the community long before midday heat arrived. Fires were lit. Fresh shellfish steamed and opened, releasing scents that drifted through the air. Meals were shared simply and gratefully. Along the edges of ancient coastal sites, large shell accumulations, mounds created over many years, were evidence of gatherings, meals, and stories told around fires as waves echoed nearby. These shell heaps were not waste. They were records of time, reminders of the people who lived lightly and respectfully. Beyond shellfish, the sea offered fish in abundance. Coastal communities observed their patterns closely. Schools that swam with certain tides, species that appeared only during particular months, fish that preferred calm inlets versus open waters. Nets woven from plant fibers were used with simple elegance. Casting a net was a skill refined by patience and practice. With a smooth circular motion, gatherers released the net like a rippling sheet across the surface. It sinks slowly, capturing fish without violence, without waste. Groups sometimes worked together, creating lines of canoes in shallow water to guide fish toward nets. The process was quiet and coordinated, shaped by instinct and familiarity with one another's movements. Nothing was hurried. The ocean was generous, and the people took only what they truly needed. Fish that were too young or too small were returned to the water with care. The idea of sustainability was not spoken aloud. It was simply understood. Along the coastline, especially near estuaries where fresh water mingled with salt, plants thrived in great variety. Each plant had a purpose. Some were used as food, Others served as medicine. Some provided fibers for weaving, others contributed color for natural dyes. Seaweed, especially varieties rich in nutrients, was gathered and dried. It flavored soups, enriched gardens, and provided minerals. Its texture and scent became familiar companions to coastal life. Grasses and reeds were harvested for basket making or mat weaving. Stronger plants produced ropes or twine. Soft fibers created blankets or ceremonial ornaments. Harvesting these plants required knowledge of tides. Some areas accessible only for a short window, others safe only during certain seasons. Those who gathered plants did so with quiet reverence, aware that these resources were part of a delicate balance. The coast was not a place to take from. It was a place to partner with. Children growing up along the Atlantic shore learned the rhythms of the coastline naturally. Their playground was the beach, the marsh, the shallow bays where crabs scuttled and small fish flickered through the water. They learned how to read tide pools, how to track footprints in wet sand, how to distinguish bird calls, how to tell time from the position of the sun. Their curiosity guided them. Their elders taught them gently, through example rather than instruction. In the evenings, children gathered around fires and listened to stories told in calm tones, stories of the ocean's creation, of animals who once shaped the land, of ancestors who followed the shoreline for hundreds of miles. These stories were lullabies, soft, rhythmic, comforting. The children fell asleep to the sound of waves. The next morning, they woke ready to explore again. Coastal life thrived on cooperation. No single family could gather everything they needed alone. Instead, people shared fishing tasks, plant harvesting, building shelters, tending fires, caring for children. Trade among coastal communities was common, but cooperation within communities was even more central. Work was divided not by strict rules, but by strengths. Some were skilled at weaving. Some excelled at fishing. Some were herbalists. Some crafted tools. Some gently guided others through memory and tradition. Everyone contributed in their own way. Everyone was valued. Meals were shared communally, especially large gatherings of shellfish or fish harvest. When someone returned from a journey with special goods, shell ornaments, pigments, or dried foods, they shared generously, knowing others would do the same. This shared life created a sense of security and warmth. The community became an extended family, shaped over time by cooperation and trust. Homes along the coast were built from materials gathered nearby: wood from forest, reeds from marshlands, grasses dried by the sun. Structures were simple but sturdy, designed to withstand wind, seasonal rains, and shifting temperatures. Openings faced away from strong ocean gusts. Roofs were layered to shed water smoothly. Inside spaces were arranged for rest, gathering, and storage. Because coastal communities often followed seasonal patterns, some homes were temporary, while others were more permanent. The flexibility of these shelters allowed people to live in harmony with changing tides, fish migrations, and plant cycles. At night, when fires glowed warmly inside shelters, families gathered close, their voices soft as waves whispered just beyond the walls. Stories were as essential as any physical resource. They explained how the tides worked, how to care for the coastline, when certain foods appeared, what dangers to avoid, which areas belonged to which families, how to respect neighboring communities. Stories traveled through song, through dance,
through symbols carved gently into wood or painted onto surfaces with natural pigments. They offered wisdom, but also comfort. When food was gathered, stories accompanied the work. Children heard stories while collecting shellfish. Travelers heard stories while resting after long journeys. Elders shared stories during times of reflection. The stories reminded everyone that they were part of something larger than themselves, a lineage stretching far back into the past and moving steadily forward into the future. As the sun sank toward the horizon, gatherings slowed. People returned to their shelters or communal spaces. Fires were lit, their warm glow flickering against the twilight sky. Food was shared: fresh fish, roasted shellfish, herbs simmered in broth, berries gathered earlier in the day. The scents drifted into the air, mingling with the cool evening breeze. Meals were quiet but comforting, filled with soft conversation and gentle laughter. Afterward, people often walked along the beach. The sand, cooled by the night air, felt smooth underfoot. The ocean shimmered beneath the stars, each wave reflecting tiny points of light. In those moments, the coastline felt timeless. The sky felt vast but comforting. The people felt connected to each other, to the land, to the ocean that sustained them. When the stars finally brightened, communities grew still. Fires burned low. The wind softened. The ocean's voice remained steady, a soothing rhythm that echoed through every corner of the shoreline. Families lay in their shelters, wrapped in woven blankets. Children drifted into dreams shaped by stories of the sea. Adults rested with contentment, knowing their work had been meaningful, their connection strong. Outside, the ocean continued its ancient cycle, rising, falling, rising, falling, just as it had for millennia. The people trusted this rhythm. They rested within it. Though centuries have passed, the memory of those early coastal communities lingers along the Atlantic shore. It remains in the shells that wash ashore after storms, the marsh plants that still sway in evening wind, the tidal pools that reveal small worlds at low tide, the quiet knowledge that the sea's rhythms shape life itself. Modern life may move faster. Cities may rise where forests once grew. Ships may cross waters once traveled only by canoe. But the essence of those ancient gatherers remains: respect for the sea, patience with its cycles, gratitude for its gifts, connection to the natural world. When one walks along the coast today, feeling the sand beneath their feet, hearing the waves whisper their timeless songs, it is possible to sense the presence of those who lived there long ago. They gathered not just food, but wisdom, not just materials, but meaning, not just shells, but stories. And the stories still linger in the shifting tides, waiting quietly for anyone who pauses long enough to listen.
Long before ledgers and receipts, long before currency shaped the rhythm of daily life, and long before marketplaces echoed with the voices of vendors calling out prices, there existed a very different kind of market along the early American coastline. It was quiet, almost meditative, a place where the sea breeze drifted between woven baskets of goods, where exchanges were made not with coins, but with gestures, stories, and relationships built across generations. These were the quiet markets of the coast, seasonal gatherings shaped by tides, weather, and the gentle needs of communities who understood that trade was not merely an act of giving and receiving, it was a way of maintaining harmony, connection, and balance in a world where nature provided just enough as long as people respected its rhythm. This is the story of those peaceful coastal markets, Where commerce was simple, trust was essential, and community was the greatest currency of all. On a calm morning, when mist still clung to the marshes and the tide shifted with slow patience, early coastal communities gathered near natural meeting points, broad sandbars, sheltered bays, river mouths that opened into salt water, and quiet inlets protected by dunes. There were no stalls, no wooden signs, no noisy crowds. Instead, families arrived at their own pace, paddling canoes or walking along sandy paths through the trees. They brought baskets filled with goods from their home regions, woven mats and durable baskets, dried fish and sea plants, carved wooden tools, pigments made from clay and crushed shells, smooth stones crafted into blades or scrapers, herbs collected from inland forests or marsh edges, shells polished into ornaments. Each basket carried not only goods, but stories. Stories of who created them, where they came from, and why they mattered. The market did not begin with a signal. It simply formed, naturally, as more people arrived and settled quietly on the sand. Unlike the structured markets of later centuries, these early gatherings flowed like the tide itself. Goods were laid out on mats, woven from reeds or grasses. The mats created small islands of color on the pale sand, soft greens, muted browns, subtle tans. Families arranged their goods with care, not to attract attention or outshine others, but because the items carried meaning. A well-woven basket represented hours of patience. A polished shell ornament represented time spent gathering along the shoreline. A stone blade represented skill passed down over generations. The spacing between groups was natural, close enough for conversation, yet wide enough for comfort. Some mats sat in the shade of driftwood or low branches. Others rested in places where the morning sun warmed the sand. There was no rush. People greeted each other with nods, smiles, or gentle words. Children played nearby, chasing small crabs or drawing patterns in the sand. The quiet markets had no formal structure because none was needed. They were held together by trust. In these markets, no one asked, "How much does this cost?" Instead, they asked, "What do you need? What would help your family this season? What can we share with you?" Trade was guided by mutual understanding rather than fixed prices or expectations. If one community had an abundance of dried fish, but fewer plant fibers, they easily found families skilled in weaving to exchange with. If someone created beautiful shell ornaments, but needed medicinal herbs, they searched for gatherers who knew the inland forests. If a family crafted durable stone tools, they traded them for food, pigments, or warm woven clothing. There was no fear of giving too much or receiving too little. The coastline itself encouraged fairness. People understood that generosity today created support tomorrow. And so every exchange carried warmth as well as practical value. Every item brought to the quiet coastal markets had a story behind it. A basket might carry the story of reeds gathered at dawn, woven by several family members over the course of days. A stone blade might reflect the slow process of shaping the perfect edge without breaking the material. A shell ornament might recall a morning tide that revealed rare treasures washed ashore. A pouch of dried herbs might come with instructions spoken softly: how to brew them, how to store them, and how they were used by the family who gathered them. When a trade took place, people did more than simply exchange goods. They exchanged knowledge. They exchanged memories.
They offered each other a glimpse into their community's life. The goods themselves were useful, but the stories behind them created connection. Imagine someone receiving a beautifully woven mat. Each time they used it, they remembered the family who wove it and the melody of the waves heard while sitting together at the market. The quiet markets strengthened not just economies, but relationships. Elders played an essential role in these gatherings. They did not lead with authority, but with gentle guidance. They remembered past seasons, past exchanges, past journeys along the coast. Their calm voices carried wisdom. This tool was shaped with patience. This pigment comes from a clay that appears only in late summer. This herb must be dried slowly in shade. This type of shell is found only after winter storms. Elders ensured that knowledge traveled just as far as the goods themselves. They were not officials. They were guardians of memory.
Children moved through the market with wide eyes and open curiosity. They picked up small shells, listened to storytellers, helped carry baskets, and learned how to greet travelers from neighboring communities. In many ways, children were the heart of the market. They asked questions without hesitation. They formed friendships across distances. They learned to appreciate the work behind goods. They practiced simple trades, offering handmade trinkets in exchange for small tokens. A child might trade a simple carved stick toy for a polished pebble. Another might offer a small hand-gathered shell in exchange for a woven bracelet. These interactions taught them the principles of community: respect, gratitude, sharing, cooperation. And as they grew older, these lessons shaped how they contributed to the markets themselves. Around midday, when the sun rose high and the sand warmed beneath bare feet, the market's pace slowed. People rested in light shade, sharing food prepared earlier that morning. Meals were simple yet nourishing: roasted fish, gathered berries, seaweed seasoned with herbs, warm broth simmered over small fires, nuts and coastal plants, freshly collected shellfish. Travelers exchanged portions of food, sometimes offering tastes of unique recipes or seasonal harvests. These meals turned the market into more than a place for trade. It became a gathering of friends, families, and distant neighbors who seldom saw each other except during these seasonal meetings. Laughter drifted across the sand, mingling with the sound of waves. Stories were told. Connections strengthened. The market became peaceful and warm, a space where the sea breeze shared the air with scents of roasted food and salt. As the sun began its slow descent, shadows lengthened across the shoreline. The afternoon light painted goods in soft golden tones, making shell ornaments gleam and woven fibers glow. This was often when the most meaningful exchanges occurred. People approached each other thoughtfully, considering what their families needed for the coming weeks or months. There was no bargaining, no tension, no urgency. Trade was a conversation, not a transaction. Your family weaves mats that last through winter. We would like to share these dried fish with you. I see you have tools shaped from riverstone. Our hunters would use them well. Your pigments are strong and bright. We have herbs gathered during early spring you may appreciate. These exchanges carried mutual respect. Each item given felt like a gift, and each item received felt like a blessing. By evening, the market began to dissolve as peacefully as it had formed. Families packed their goods into baskets and placed them carefully in canoes or carried them along familiar pathways back to their communities. Children collected their treasures of the day: shells, stones, small woven tokens. Fires were lit along the beach, not for trade, but for rest. Travelers who were too far from home stayed the night, building temporary shelters out of reeds, driftwood,
or woven mats. They sat in small circles around the fire, sharing food and stories as the sky darkened. The sound of the waves grew deeper, more rhythmic in the night air. Stars emerged one by one. The moon cast a pale glow across the water, and the quiet market slowed into a quiet night. The markets were more than places to exchange goods. They were gatherings where relationships were renewed, knowledge was passed down, unity was strengthened, communities cooperated, children learned the value of sharing, and stories spread across distances. They created a network of trust along the coastline, an invisible thread connecting villages separated by miles of water or forest. Goods moved from hand to hand, but stories moved from heart to heart. In a world without currency, these markets revealed something profound. Value is not created by metal or paper. It is created by people, by their labor, their connections, their gratitude, and their care. Today, when walking along a calm stretch of Atlantic shoreline, one can still feel the quiet presence of those ancient markets. In the curve of a dune shaped by wind, in the soft shimmer of shells scattered after a tide, in the faint scent of salt and marsh grass drifting through the air, in the peaceful rhythm of waves reaching the shore. These echoes remind us that trade was once gentle, patient, and deeply human. A woven mat was more than an item. It was a story. A handful of dried herbs was more than medicine. It was trust. A carved stone tool was more than technology. It was a gift from one community to another. The quiet markets honored the idea that people were part of a shared world, connected by the sea and by the cycles that shaped their lives.
And though these markets no longer form along the coast in the way they once did, their spirit lives on in the idea of fair exchange, friendship, and communal well-being. The sea remembers. The sand remembers. And when the tide rises and falls, steady, calm, eternal, it whispers the memory of those ancient gatherings, markets of peace, stories, and connection, held together not by coins, but by kindness. Long before the Atlantic coastline saw ships with tall masts or bustling ports filled with travelers from across the world, long before charts marked safe passages and coastal towns grew into thriving cultural centers, there was a different kind of movement along the shore. One that happened slowly, silently, and without deliberate design. It was not the movement of people alone, not the drift of sand alone, not the spread of goods alone. It was the drift of cultures and ideas carried by time, by tide, and by the constant mingling of communities who lived along the ever-changing edge where land meets sea. The ancient Atlantic coast of North America was not static. It was a living, breathing corridor of exchange. And just as waves gently move sand from one stretch of beach to another, ideas moved as well, reshaping generations with soft persistence. This is the story of that longshore drift of cultures and ideas, carried not by force, but by curiosity, respect, and the quiet rhythms of coastal life. The shoreline never looked exactly the same from one season to the next. Winter storms carved new curves into the sand. Summer waves smoothed rough edges. Tidal rivers shifted their paths over time. Communities who lived along this coastline understood that the land itself moved. They watched dunes migrate slowly in the wind, marsh grasses expand after heavy rains, and new sandbars appear offshore like pale, shimmering islands. Just as the coast evolved, so did the people.
Families might remain rooted in familiar places for generations, but ideas traveled freely along the water's edge. Knowledge drifted much like sand, carried by currents of conversation, gatherings, seasonal trade, and shared journeys. No one tried to stop this drift. It was natural, expected, even welcomed. The coastline provided long, open routes for movement. Travelers could journey by canoe along sheltered waters, following estuaries, bays, and tidal rivers. Others walked along hard-packed sand when the tide receded, leaving long stretches of beach flat and smooth. These pathways were not roads carved by tools. They were gifts from the ocean and land working together. Travelers brought with them knowledge of weather patterns, stories of ancestors, new crafting techniques, songs carried across generations, ways of preparing food, and ceremonial traditions. When they reached another community, they shared what they knew, listened to what others had learned, and then carried those blended ideas further along the coast. Progress moved not in leaps, but in ripples. Certain places along the coast became meeting points, natural hubs where communities gathered seasonally to trade, rest, and reconnect. These gatherings were peaceful and filled with gentle conversation. Goods exchanged included coastal foods, woven baskets, small tools, shell ornaments, pigments, and medicinal plants. But even more valuable were the intangible exchanges. Stories traveled further than shells. Songs lingered longer than carved wooden items. Techniques for fishing, building, cooking, or healing spread from one community to another without anyone forcing them to do so. Imagine a person from the northern coast learning a new method of preserving fish for winter. They take this knowledge home, share it with their family, and the method becomes part of their seasonal practice. A year later, someone from their community travels south and shares it again. The idea, like a grain of sand carried by the current, slowly shifts and settles across the landscape. This quiet diffusion shaped the way people lived along hundreds of miles of coastline. Stories were among the most powerful carriers of culture, spoken in low tones by fireside or shared while resting during long journeys. Each story held a fragment of history, memory, humor, or wisdom. As stories drifted along the coast, some grew longer, some grew simpler, some merged with other stories. Some became metaphors taught to children. Some guided travelers or hunters. Language itself shifted subtly from one community to another. Certain words might change pronunciation or take on additional meanings or blend with terms learned from distant neighbors. This drift was never forced. It happened naturally, organically, through countless gentle interactions. Even gestures and expressions moved along with stories. The way someone pointed toward the horizon, or acknowledged the visitor, or expressed gratitude became part of the shared cultural rhythm of the shoreline. In this way, the coast did not just shape geography, it shaped communication.
The ocean was both a provider and a challenge. Those who lived near it needed to understand its moods, when tides would rise unusually high, which winds carried storms, how certain clouds foretold change, where fish would migrate each season. No single community knew everything, but collectively they knew much. And as people moved along the coast, knowledge drifted with them. A coastal group in the north might learn from southern neighbors that a certain bird's behavior signals the arrival of nutrient-rich currents. A community near a wide bay might teach inland visitors how moon phases influence tidal flow. Someone living by a barrier island might explain how dunes protect inner marshlands from storms. This knowledge saved lives, improved fishing techniques, strengthened communities, and deepened respect for nature. Just like longshore drift carries grains of sand from one curve of the coast to another, this knowledge built up slowly, enriching the coastline over time. Each coastal community had its own specialties, crafts perfected by generations. Some were masters of weaving strong, flexible mats from marsh reeds. Others shaped wood into elegant canoe frames. Some carved shells into delicate beads. Others sculpted stone tools with precise skill. When travelers visited one another, they noticed these differences. They asked questions. They watched and learned. A person might return home and try weaving a new pattern learned from a distant community. Another might adopt a more efficient way to shape a fishing hook. Someone else might paint using a pigment color they had never seen before. Over time, these techniques blended. Just as the sea gathers bits of driftwood, shells, and seaweed, depositing them in new places, cultural craftsmanship gathered along the coast, mixing and evolving through generations of peaceful exchange. Among the ideas that drifted along the shore were ceremonial traditions, ways to honor the sea, the land, the sun, the moon, and life itself. While each community retained its own customs, many shared common themes: gratitude for the tides, respect for animals that provide food, celebration of seasonal changes, rituals marking transitions in life, stories honoring ancestors. When people gathered for trade or social visits, they often witnessed ceremonies different from their own. They might carry home a new song, a new gesture of blessing, or a new way of marking the changing seasons. Ceremonial ideas blended gently, never replacing older traditions, but adding nuanced layers to them, much like waves smoothing a stone without erasing its shape. This cultural drift created unity across distance without uniformity. A shared respect for nature tied communities together even when they lived far apart. Some individuals became known for their long journeys. They traveled not as merchants, nor explorers, nor ambassadors, but as quiet connectors between communities. They carried news, songs, shared memories, lessons learned, gentle observations, and stories from faraway shores. These travelers were welcomed warmly wherever they went, not because of what they brought in their hands, but because of what they carried in their minds. They were like the longshore current itself, moving steadily along the coast, shaping the cultural landscape without force. Imagine now a calm evening near one such coastal gathering place. A fire glows softly in a shallow pit, its light flickering across faces turned toward the sea. Waves roll in with rhythmic gentleness. Shells glisten in the fading light. Fish roast slowly over coals. Families sit in relaxed circles. Children listen with wide eyes as visitors share tales of distant places along the shoreline. In this peaceful gathering, new ideas drift effortlessly. A weaving technique shared by someone from the north, a story told by a traveler from the south, a method of predicting weather from observing the behavior of birds, a new way of preserving harvest foods, a melody carried on the wind, learned miles away. No one rushes to record these ideas. They are absorbed naturally, slowly, without pressure. And in the mingling of these soft conversations, cultures shift, not dramatically, but gently, like the sand patterns beneath shallow waves. As centuries passed, the longshore drift of cultures shaped a beautifully connected world along the Atlantic shore. Communities remained distinct, each with their own identity, traditions, and stories. Yet, threads of shared knowledge tied them together with quiet strength. The coastline, in its vastness, became a communal space of learning,
a place where ideas traveled as easily as canoes gliding through tide waters. The drift was not visible in a single moment. It appeared only when looking back across time. A new style of basket weaving in one area, a song with shared verses hundreds of miles apart, a similar tool design appearing across multiple communities, shared harvesting techniques carried along the coast. Culture did not stand still. It moved with the tides.
Today, much has changed. Cities dot the coastline. Ports welcome ships from across the world. Technology bridges distances instantly. Yet, the ancient longshore drift of cultures leaves its quiet echoes. In the shared respect many coastal communities still hold for the sea. In traditional crafts and food preparations. In the stories that speak of ancestors living in harmony with the land. In the idea that knowledge grows through sharing. In the calm understanding that cultures thrive when they flow naturally. Standing at the edge of the Atlantic today, feeling the steady pull of the tide, watching foam gather on sand, listening to waves move with timeless rhythm, one can almost sense the movement of ideas beneath the surface. Not with noise, not with force, but with the same gentle persistence that shapes the shore. Ideas drifted then. Ideas drift now. And the coastline continues to carry them, quietly, patiently, eternally, along the long, curving edge of the continent. Before metal hulls cut across the ocean, before engines churned water into white foam, before harbors filled with fleets of vessels from every corner of the world, there were wooden boats. Quiet boats. Patient boats. Boats carved lovingly from the forests that lined the eastern seaboard of North America. These boats were more than transportation. They were companions of the sea, extensions of the people who shaped them and trusted them to carry families, goods, and stories across calm bays, winding rivers, and coastal stretches bathed in shifting light. This is the story of those wooden boats, how they were born from timber, how they traveled, and how they carried the earliest coastal communities through centuries of peaceful connection. In the centuries before industrial settlements rose along the Atlantic coastline, forests pressed right up to the water's edge in many places. Tall trees, straight, strong, and seasoned by wind, grew within earshot of the waves. Pines, cedars, oaks, birches, and other hardwoods flourished in the rich coastal soil. For those who lived along the eastern seaboard, these forests were more than shelter. They were boatyards crafted by nature itself. People learned to study trees with patience. Which trunks grew straight enough for long vessels? Which woods resisted rot when touched by salt water? Which branches bent gently into natural curves? Which barks peeled smoothly for coverings or insulation? Timber was abundant, but it was never taken without thought. A tree selected for boat making was honored, spoken to, thanked, and treated with care. Crafting a boat began with gratitude. And so, in the quiet of early morning, boatmakers entered the forest not to conquer it, but to collaborate with it. Boat-making was an art passed down through generations. Elders guided younger builders through the forest, teaching them how to read the health of a tree by its bark, its roots, and the subtle lean of its trunk.
To build a hollowed-out dugout canoe, a large, straight tree was essential. To build a light, frame and skin vessel, flexible wood for ribs mattered most. To create paddles, smaller trees with fine grain were ideal. Builders looked for wood free of knots, trunks that tapped gently in the wind, trees that grew near water, already accustomed to moisture, timber with steady grain and natural curves. When a tree was chosen, the community often gathered quietly, acknowledging that this living being would soon become part of their journeys along rivers and sea. There was no rush. Boat-making always began with stillness. The transformation from tree to boat took time, days or weeks depending on the method. Dugout canoes. One of the earliest and most enduring boat styles was the dugout canoe. Builders felled a large tree with controlled effort, using stone tools and fire to shape their way through dense wood. The process often followed this rhythm. Burn the center of the log carefully to soften the wood. Scrape away charred sections with stone or shell tools. Repeat, slowly widening the hollow. Smooth the interior with careful scraping motions. Shape the exterior to balance weight and glide through water. Let the canoe dry slowly in shade to avoid cracks. The builders knew how far to hollow before the wood weakened. They understood how to curve the sides so the canoe sat perfectly in the water. The result was a sturdy, elegant vessel, capable of navigating shallow streams and open bays alike. Frame-built boats. In some coastal regions, builders crafted lighter boats made from flexible wood frames covered in bark or woven materials. These were nimble and portable, ideal for navigating marshy waterways or long distances along calm inlets. The construction steps included bending young saplings into curved ribs, securing the frame with plant fibers, and stretching bark or woven material over the structure, sealing seams with resin or natural waterproofing. These boats floated high and responded quickly to paddling, making them favorites for travel requiring speed or maneuverability. Canoes of bark. Some communities crafted boats from large sheets of bark taken carefully from certain tree species without killing the tree. The bark was flattened, shaped, sewn, and reinforced.
These boats were light enough for a single person to carry across short distances of land, an invaluable feature along a coast whose waterways shifted with tides. Once a boat was completed, it was brought to the water with reverence. This moment was not marked by grand ceremony, but by quiet acknowledgement of the partnership between people and nature. The boat slid into the water gently, its hull meeting the surface with a subtle ripple. Builders watched the way it sat, how high it floated, how smoothly it moved, how stable it felt under shifting weight, how the water hugged its curves. If adjustments were needed, they were made with care, shaving a bit more wood, evening the sides, reinforcing a joint. When the boat moved with ease, silence often followed, not because there was nothing to say, but because the satisfaction ran deeper than words. A completed boat was as much a work of art as a tool for travel. A wooden boat was only as effective as the paddles guiding it. Paddles were crafted with the same patient attention as the boats, carved from straight branches with smooth grain. Builders shaped handles to fit comfortably in the palm, neither too large nor too narrow. Blades were thinned but not fragile, tapering into curves that sliced through water quietly. A good paddle felt like an extension of the hand, not simply something held, but something trusted. Paddles were often polished with natural oils, becoming smooth through many journeys and many hands. Each stroke of a paddle in water connected the traveler to the boat, to the sea, and to generations before them. Once crafted, wooden boats became essential tools for movement along the eastern seaboard. Traveling along the coastline. The coastline offered sheltered inlets and calm waters perfect for wooden vessels. Travelers paddled close to shore, using landmarks such as leaning trees, unique rock formations, tall dunes, and distant islands. The boats glided with a soft whisper, barely disturbing the water. Paddlers moved in rhythm with waves, letting the ocean guide their speed. Navigating tidal rivers. Rivers flowing into the Atlantic served as natural highways. Wooden boats slipped into these waters effortlessly, moving upstream with steady paddling and downstream with the gentle push of currents. Travelers knew exactly when to begin their journeys. During slack tide for easier maneuvering, during rising tide for greater speed inland, and during low tide to access exposed resources. Journeying through marshlands. Some boats were specially crafted for shallow marshes. Their light frames allowed them to skim over narrow channels lined with reeds and grasses. In these quiet places, the sound of paddling was often the only break in the stillness. Birds rose slowly into the air. Fish darted beneath the surface. The water reflected sky and grass in peaceful harmony. Wooden boats transported goods, salt, shells, woven items, dried fish, herbs, but they also carried something less tangible: stories, songs, traditions, knowledge, and reassurance. When people traveled by boat, they shared experiences along the way. A story told while paddling through calm water, a song sung to mark time on a long journey, advice exchanged while resting on a sandbar, observations about changes in tides or wildlife. The boats were vessels for culture as much as for supplies. Building a boat involved more than the builder. It involved gatherers who collected appropriate wood, children who brought small stones or fibers, elders who offered guidance in memory, families who prepared food for workers, travelers who shared knowledge of water routes. When the boat was completed, the whole community shared in its presence. They recognized its importance, how it would connect them to neighboring groups, help gather food, and carry stories across distances. Boats symbolized cooperation. They symbolized continuity. They symbolized trust. Wooden boats needed regular care, and this care became a peaceful ritual. After each journey, boats were turned upside down to dry. Cracks were patched with resin. Edges were smoothed with stone. Bark coverings were reinforced. Paddles were oiled and stored. Maintenance was never rushed. It was deliberate, calming, almost meditative, another way of staying connected to the vessel that supported daily life. Travelers often murmured quietly while working, soft reflections about the journey, the changing shoreline, or the weather patterns they had observed. These quiet tasks sustained not just the boat, but the relationship between people and the water. Wooden boats allowed travelers to move safely even as night approached. The sea at dusk became soft and muted, its surface reflecting fading sky colors.
Paddlers navigated by the sound of waves against rocks, by the silhouettes of trees, by the position of stars, by the direction of the evening breeze. Journeys at night held a quiet magic. Each dip of the paddle created tiny ripples that glowed when bioluminescent water shimmered below.
The boat floated through this light like a drifting star. If travelers stopped for the night, they pulled the boat onto shore and rested beside it. Fires flickered, casting warm glows on wood polished by many hands and many tides. The boat rested too, waiting for dawn's soft invitation to glide once more. As centuries passed, boat styles evolved, but the essence remained. A wooden boat was a partnership between nature and people, a vessel shaped by patience, a reliable friend along unpredictable waters. Children grew up watching elders craft boats, listening to the soft scraping of tools against wood. They learned how to steady a canoe in choppy water, how to read the ripples of a river, how to launch quietly at sunrise. Boats became symbols of identity, each community shaping them with subtle differences that revealed place, tradition, and skill. Even as later technologies emerged, the memory of those early wooden boats lingered in coastal heritage, preserved in stories, ceremonies, and the quiet admiration passed down through generations. Today, standing along the eastern seaboard on a quiet stretch of coastline, untouched by noise, one might imagine a wooden boat gliding across the water, its hull catching glimmers of dawn, its paddles whispering into the sea, its wake forming soft curves behind it. That image echoes the journeys of countless travelers from centuries past. They moved without rush. They navigated without machines. They crafted vessels without blueprints. They trusted the water, the sky, and the wood beneath their hands. The timber trails of old may not exist now as they once did, but their memory remains woven into the coastline. In the swaying of coastal forests, in the patterns of waves near river mouths, in the stories told across generations. Wooden boats once linked communities along the Atlantic shore, carrying goods, carrying people, carrying culture. Their quiet presence shaped the rhythm of life, guided by tides, wind, and the steady heartbeat of the sea. And so the story drifts on as calm and enduring as the coastline itself. Long before trade routes stretched across continents, long before ships carried cargo marked with distant symbols, long before harbors filled with shouts, lanterns, and tall wooden masts, there was the ocean, a living force, a teacher, a guide, a constant presence shaping every moment along the early Atlantic coastline of North America. For the coastal communities who lived in harmony with the sea, the ocean's rhythm became the rhythm of life itself. Its tides shaped daily routines, its currents inspired seasonal journeys, its moods determined when to gather, when to rest, and when to trade. This is the story of how the rhythm of the ocean and the rhythm of trade became intertwined, not through commerce dictated by numbers, but through quiet cooperation, observation, and deep respect for nature's steady pulse. Before mechanical clocks measured time, communities looked outward, to the shoreline, to the shifting tides, to the changing sky. The ocean itself shaped the schedule of each day. Morning, the tide retreats.
At dawn, when the sky glowed with soft shades of rose and silver, the tide often pulled away from the shore. It revealed sandbars, shell beds, shallow pools filled with small creatures, driftwood left by the night, and safe pathways across marshes. This low tide was a signal, a natural clock saying, "Now is the time to gather. Now is the time to begin your work." Families stepped onto the damp sand, baskets in hand, their feet sinking lightly into the cool earth. The sound of morning waves, gentle, rhythmic, guided their movements. Midday, the ocean expanded. By midday, the tide returned, swelling across the shoreline in slow, deliberate motion. Water flooded tidal creeks, lifted canoes gently from their resting places, and restored the coastline's familiar curve. This rising tide carried travelers toward distant communities. It brought fishermen closer to deeper waters. It lifted boats filled with goods prepared for exchange. It was a message from the ocean. Now is the time to travel, to share, to connect. In late afternoon, the sea again shifted, pulling back into itself. The retreat offered calm, open sands, ideal for resting, repairing baskets, cleaning tools, and preparing for nighttime gatherings. As the sky dimmed into twilight, the gentle rhythm of the ocean encouraged reflection, storytelling, and peaceful exchange. And at night, the tide often rose again under moonlight, whispering softly as it carried stories, goods, and travelers through sheltered waterways. Trade along the early Atlantic coastline did not follow strict schedules. It followed the sea. The slow, gentle pace of exchange. No one hurried, no one forced, no one controlled the rhythm. People arrived when the tide allowed safe travel. They departed when the sea gave its quiet nod of approval. This unhurried pace shaped the culture of trade. Goods were exchanged with patience. Conversations drifted like waves. Relationships strengthened over time. Trade became a reflection of the ocean's own rhythm, steady, cyclical, and filled with natural pauses. Travelers guided by water. Boats moved along currents like leaves carried by a stream. Paddlers understood which tides helped their direction, which winds complemented the movement, when to glide, when to paddle, when to rest. The ocean, with its ever-changing rhythm, created natural windows for travel, and those who respected this rhythm found their journeys smoother and safer. People didn't decide when to trade. The tide did.
Trade goods reflected the diversity of the coastal world, each shaped by nature's cycles. Salt and dried fish. When the sun shone brightest and the ocean warmed, salt formed in tidal pools. Dried fish preserved during these months traveled far along the coast, sustaining inland families during colder seasons. Shells and ornaments. Tides revealed spectacular shells at certain times of year. Their shine, texture, and symbolism made them perfect trade items, tokens of beauty from the shoreline. Tools and timber. The forest responded to the ocean seasons too. Storms might bring fallen trees ideal for boat making. Calm periods allowed for careful gathering of strong, straight branches. Tools crafted from stone or wood traveled gently between communities, each telling the story of the maker's skill. Seeds, plants, and herbs. Some plants grew only in coastal marshlands, thriving with the ebb and flow of salt water. Others grew inland but were brought to markets by travelers who followed river routes to the sea. These goods moved not in bulk, but with care, carried by people who valued their meaning.
Trade required connection, and the coastline offered many natural spaces for these gatherings. Sandy inlets, calm, shallow inlets allowed boats to arrive safely at low tide and depart with ease at high tide. These places became peaceful markets where communities shared food, stories, and goods. Shell beaches. Beaches littered with shells were convenient spots to rest, gather materials, or wait for the next safe tide. Shells glimmered like small lanterns in the sunlight, marking familiar meeting places across generations. Forest edges. Where trees met the sea, long stretches of shade made perfect areas for exchanging goods in warm weather. River mouths. Where fresh water met salt water, communities gathered to trade goods from inland and coastal regions. These river mouths were bustling in a gentle way, filled with voices soft enough not to disturb wildlife. All of these locations reflected the ocean's rhythm. As tides shifted, so did gatherings. As the coastline changed, so did meeting places. Trade was never static. It was as fluid as water itself. Trade was more than goods. It was communication, a flow of ideas as steady as the waves. Stories of weather and seasons. Communities shared observations, how storms behaved, when fishing was best, when birds migrated, how tides shifted during certain moons. This information helped travelers prepare and adapt. Stories of craft and skill. A beautiful woven basket often came with its story. This pattern came from my grandmother. These reeds were gathered after the last storm. This technique helps the basket hold shape in humidity. These stories became part of the goods themselves. Stories of journeys. Travelers described their journeys, the calm morning waters, the fog that softened the world, the moonlit path across still bays. People listened with interest, imagining the rhythm of the sea through the traveler's eyes. Stories of community and kinship. Trade gatherings connected families separated by geography. Stories reinforced shared identity. Friendships renewed, alliances strengthened, cultural knowledge enriched. Stories drifted along the coast much like goods. Slow, dependable, meaningful. As the sun lowered and painted the sky in golden hues, trade gatherings often grew even more peaceful. The wind softened, the waves grew slower, and a quiet calm settled over the market. People sat near fires, sorting goods, caring for tools, and sharing meals. The glow from flames reflected on shells and polished wood, making them shimmer warmly. Children drifted between groups listening to stories. Elders recited teachings tied to tides and stars. Travelers prepared for early morning departures. Everything felt unhurried, wrapped in the soft promise of another tide to come. At night, the ocean did not sleep. It whispered. Waves rolled gently across the sand in repeating patterns, each one part of a larger, ancient rhythm. Those who slept near the shore felt comfort in the consistency, the sea's voice rising and falling like breathing. The rhythm of the waves was like the rhythm of trade, predictable, yet ever-changing, calm, yet powerful, cyclical, yet full of quiet surprises. In this nighttime world, boats rested pulled far up the shore, their hulls dried by soft wind, their paddles leaned neatly beside them. Their journeys paused until the ocean's next invitation. And the people rested too, trusting that the tide would guide them in the morning, just as it had guided their ancestors for generations. Trade was not a practice separated from life. It was woven into daily existence.
Communities time their activities around the moon, the tide, the seasons, the migration patterns of fish and birds. These natural cycles acted as shared understandings that united distant groups into a single rhythm, a coastal pulse experienced across hundreds of miles of shoreline. A traveler from the north could understand the rhythm of a southern community because both listened to the same sea, both trusted the same tides, both followed the same gentle cues of wind and water. In this unity, trade flourished, not in abundance or luxury, but in connection, cooperation, and mutual respect. Even today, the eastern seaboard carries echoes of those early rhythms. You can feel it in the pull of the tide beneath your feet, in the steady sound of waves meeting the sand, in fishing boats that still time their departures with the tide, in coastal communities that honor the sea as both provider and teacher. Modern life may move faster, but the ocean's rhythm endures. Trade is no longer quiet. Markets are no longer serene gatherings by driftwood fires, yet the fundamental truth remains. The sea shapes human life. It sets the pace. It encourages patience. It invites connection. And its rhythm, eternal and unbroken, continues to echo through every coastal memory, every sea story, every human interaction shaped by water. The earliest coastal communities listened to the ocean and discovered a profound wisdom. To live in harmony with one another, we must first learn to live in harmony with the world. The rhythm of the ocean guided them. The rhythm of trade followed. And both rhythms continue, softly, endlessly, like waves returning home. Before towering ports lined the Atlantic coast, before breakwaters jutted into the sea, before charts outlined every cove, inlet, and bay, there were secluded harbors, quiet sanctuaries shaped not by human hands, but by the patient work of tides, winds, and ancient landscapes. These harbors were safe shelters for the earliest travelers along the eastern seaboard of North America, calm places where boats could rest, where storms softened their voices, and where communities gathered in peaceful, unhurried rhythms. They existed long before the concept of a harbor was formalized. They were simply known as places where the water held its breath. This is the story of those hidden sanctuaries and the travelers who trusted them. A secluded harbor was not defined by walls or docks. It was defined by nature's embrace. These havens appeared in many forms: curved coves protected by headlands, narrow inlets where tall grasses swayed, river mouths shielded by sandbars, rocky alcoves softened by centuries of weather. Travelers learned to identify them not by sight alone, but by sound, scent, and the behavior of water. A harbor announced itself softly. The waves spoke more gently. The wind lost its edge. The surface of the water smoothed like a calm breath. And when the ocean offered such stillness, travelers knew they had found a safe place to stop. Imagine a traveler paddling a wooden canoe along the coastline. The sun is low. A storm lingers on the horizon. Waves grow taller, pushing with more force than comfort. In that moment, a sheltered harbor becomes more than a convenience. It becomes an invitation. Signs travelers watched for. 1. Change in water color. As the canoe neared a harbor, the water darkened slightly, indicating depth and protection from breaking waves. 2. Sound shift. The roar of the open sea softened into a mudded hush. 3. Bird behavior. Coastal birds circled low near calm water, guiding travelers towards safety. 4. Scent in the air. Harbors had their own fragrances. Fresh water mingling with salt, marsh grasses breathing gently, distant forests releasing earthy notes. 5. Wind pattern. Trees near harbors often bent differently,
shaped by gentler winds. These signs were subtle, but to early maritime travelers, they were as clear as markers on a map. Travelers approached slowly, allowing the canoe to glide with the tide. As they crossed the threshold between open sea and protected water, tension left their shoulders. The boat stabilized. The world grew quieter. Inside the harbor, the water behaved differently. Ripples instead of waves, circles formed by fish at the surface, reflections of trees shimmering clearly. The land wrapped around the water like a protective arm. Travelers did not speak loudly upon arrival. Out of respect for the place, and perhaps out of reverence, they kept their voices low, mirroring the harbor's stillness. They dragged their boats gently onto sand or mudflats and stood for a moment, letting their feet settle into ground that was no longer shifting beneath them. They had reached safety. These sheltered places became temporary homes for travelers. Some stayed only a night, others stayed days or weeks, depending on weather, tides, and the purpose of their journey. Shelters built simply. Temporary shelters were crafted quickly. Wooden frames made from driftwood, coverings woven from grasses or bark, fires built at the edge of the forest. These shelters didn't need to last forever. They were designed to blend into the landscape, to offer warmth and to stand quietly alongside the harbor's natural rhythm. Gathering food in a haven. Harbors teemed with life. Fish schooling in calm waters, shellfish dotting tidal edges, edible plants thriving in moist soil, birds resting or nesting nearby. Travelers gathered respectfully, taking only what they needed.
Fresh water, the heart of a harbor. Many secluded harbors existed where streams met the sea. Fresh water trickled or rushed into salt water, creating pockets of brackish life. Travelers refilled their baskets, jars, or hollowed gourds here. Fresh water was a gift more precious than any trade good. As evening approached, the harbor transformed into a sanctuary of calm. The water darkened to mirror the sky. The wind slowed into soft whispers. Birds settled into their roosts, calling lightly. Travelers lit fires that flickered in warm amber tones. Evening rituals emerged naturally. Drying clothes beside the fire, mending nets or tools, preparing fish caught earlier, sharing stories from past journeys, watching the sky shift from gold to purple to starlit blue. Children, if present, wandered along the shallows, letting small waves lap at their feet. Adults often stood quietly by the water's edge, listening to the harbor's soft breathing. No matter how long the day had been, the harbor wrapped them in calm. Many stories and lessons were passed down about these harbors, tales shared generation after generation. Stories of safety. People spoke of storms that swept the coastline, yet never disturbed certain harbors. They described the protective embrace of land that shielded boats from strong winds. Stories of ancestors. Elders told how ancestors once crossed long stretches of shoreline and always found this particular harbor when they needed it most. These stories became part of the cultural memory of the coast. Stories of hospitality. Harbors were seen as places where nature offered rest without judgment. No matter who arrived, trader, traveler, family, messenger, the harbor welcomed them equally. Stories of transformation. Young travelers often experience personal change within these spaces, gaining confidence, understanding their connection to the sea, or learning patience while waiting for safe tides. Harbors became teachers as much as any elder. Not all days were gentle. When storms rolled in, the true value of a secluded harbor became clear. Approaching storm. The sea grew restless. Birds retreated inland. Clouds darkened with purposeful weight. Winds quickened. Travelers who knew the land hurried to the nearest sheltered cove. Inside the harbor during the storm. Inside the harbor, the difference was profound. Waves broken by protective land barely reached the shore. Trees blocked the harshest winds. Rain fell softly, not sideways. Boats remained steady or safely pulled up on land. Families huddled in shelters, listening to the muffled sound of the storm outside, a distant roar rather than an immediate threat. During these nights, storytelling became essential. Of previous storms, lessons on survival, gentle reassurances from elders, reflections on nature's balance. Children often fell asleep to the sound of winds softened by surrounding hills. And when the storm passed, harbors glistened with renewed life. Fresh pools of water, fallen branches for future fires, and a coastline washed clean by rain. Though secluded, these harbors were not isolated. They became natural gathering spots for coastal communities. Trade and exchange. Travelers from different regions often found each other unexpectedly in the same harbor. They exchanged food, baskets, tools, pigments, shells, and stories. These chance meetings strengthened connections across vast stretches of coastline. Shared meals. When two or more groups stayed in the same harbor overnight, a communal meal often formed, a gentle expression of trust and friendship. Collaborative repairs. Travelers help one another repair boats damaged by time or weather. A cracked paddle, a softened hull, a frayed net. Such repairs were done patiently, with shared skill and gratitude. At night, after meals were shared and tasks completed, peaceful quiet settled across the harbor. The sky above glimmered with constellations familiar to all coastal communities. The water below reflected their light in shimmering patches. Travelers lay on woven mats or soft sand, gazing upward while the harbor murmured softly beside them. Night in a secluded harbor offered a sense of belonging, a pause from life's uncertainty, a chance to feel connected to something vast and ancient. These moments were unhurried, silent, restorative. A traveler might fall asleep to the faint lap of water against shore, knowing the harbor held them safely through the night. Departure was rarely abrupt. Travelers waited for a tide that welcomed movement. At dawn, when pale gold brushed the horizon, the harbor slowly awakened. Birds called from trees, mist drifted above the water. Light glimmered across still surfaces. Travelers prepared their boats, tightening bindings, loading baskets, checking paddles, and thanking the harbor in quiet ways. When the tide turned favorable, they pushed gently into the water, gliding out from the haven that had sheltered them. And as they crossed the invisible threshold from calm harbor to open sea, they carried with them renewed strength, gratitude, fresh stories, knowledge gained, and the memory of a peaceful sanctuary. Many secluded harbors were used generation after generation. Some were passed down in stories. Others existed only in memory, visited briefly, and then left behind as the coastline changed over time. But the sense of sanctuary they offered became part of cultural heritage, a reminder that nature provides refuge, a symbol of resilience, a testament to the harmony between people and land, a place where fear softened into peace. Even today, when one stands along a quiet stretch of coastline, far from crowded beaches or busy marinas,
These ancient harbors can be felt. They whisper through the curves of untouched coves. They echo in the calmness within protected bays. They live in the stillness between waves. Harbors represent more than water and land. They represent hope. For ancient travelers, a harbor was a promise of shelter, a pause in their journey, a chance to gather strength, a reminder of their connection to the world. Modern life may offer different kinds of shelter, but the feeling remains the same. The need for a quiet place, a safe space, a pause from movement, a moment to breathe deeply. Secluded harbors along the ancient coast fulfilled that need in gentle, enduring ways. And though the travelers who sought them have long since drifted into history, the coastline still holds their memory, patiently, lovingly, like the tide returning again and again. These harbors remain symbols of peace, waiting silently for anyone who listens closely enough to hear their ancient call. Long before written letters crossed great distances, long before ships carried messages sealed with wax, long before the telegraph, radio, or satellite beams connected communities, there was the sea. And the sea had a way of carrying news, slowly, gently, and with the patience of tides that never ceased their rhythm. Along the early Atlantic coast of North America, news did not spread with urgency. It drifted. It floated. It traveled with the same calm persistence as the waves that nudged the shoreline day after day. People understood that the sea was their greatest messenger, not only because it allowed travel, but because it connected communities in ways no land path ever could. This is the story of how news, stories, warnings, and memories traveled along the coast through the ancient, peaceful networks of the sea. The Atlantic shoreline was not a barrier. It was a bridge. Even communities separated by many miles of marsh, forest, or rocky terrain could reach each other through waterways, winding rivers, tidal creeks, sheltered inlets, and long coastal passages. Travelers understood that news did not belong to one place. It belonged to everyone who lived within the embrace of the tide. Because of this, the movement of information flowed naturally, from north to south, from inland rivers to the open coast, from sheltered bays to wider waters, and from community to community. The sea held them together like threads woven along the edge of a vast fabric. In an age without formal messengers, travelers became the carriers of news, quiet, observant individuals who moved with purpose but not with haste.
Why they traveled. People traveled for many reasons: to trade goods, to visit relatives in distant coastal settlements, to attend seasonal gatherings, to exchange knowledge, to explore new fishing or gathering areas. Along the way, they collected news like shells gathered from a beach, stories of seasonal changes, descriptions of new techniques for crafting tools, warnings about storms or shifting tides, celebrations of births, gatherings, or successful harvests. Travelers never saw news as something they owned. It was something they shared, a gift carried across miles of shimmering water. News traveled at the pace of the sea. A message carried south might take many days. A message carried north might take weeks. But the news always arrived. Coastal communities accepted this rhythm. There was no impatience. Time moved with the tide, not with pressure. What mattered was that news came in its own season, soon enough to guide, warm, or support those who received it. Just as waves reached the shore again and again, news eventually reached the ears of those who needed to hear it. Secluded harbors and calm coves became natural centers for exchanging news. When travelers stopped to rest, they shared what they carried: Stories from distant shores, knowledge of the changing coastline, updates from neighboring families, lessons learned during travel. These harbors, filled with gentle conversation around fires, became the quiet equivalent of a community bulletin. No announcements, no proclamations, just voices blending with the sound of water. Even the land recorded news. Over time, harbors accumulated signs of recent activity. Footprints in sand showing how many had visited, small piles of shells indicating shared meals, smoothed sections of driftwood from recent fires, footprints of children suggesting families passed through. These were subtle messages, but they spoke to those who knew how to read them. The coastline recorded its own news in the language of patterns. Not all news came from people. Much of it came from nature itself. Early coastal communities watched the sea with practiced eyes, seeing messages in the color of the water. Dark streaks offshore might indicate fish migrations. Cloudy green water near river mouths signaled seasonal changes. The movement of birds. Birds flying inland warned of storms. Birds gathering near the shoreline suggested abundance. Patterns of waves. Long rolling waves hinted at distant winds. Choppy, inconsistent waves foretold unpredictable weather. Smell in the breeze. A salty, sharp scent hinted at storms. A cool, earthy breeze signaled change in season. Nature, like a wise elder, warned quietly and calmly, and people understood. Canoes did more than transport goods. They transported perspectives. Each canoe held the skill of the builder, the memory of journeys, the strength of the travelers, the stories of the communities that shaped them. As paddles dipped into water, travelers spoke softly. They didn't need to raise their voices. The sea carried sound more gently than land. They shared stories of successful harvests, new fishing grounds, births and celebrations, changes in the coastline, gatherings soon to take place, neighboring communities doing well. These stories spread like seeds across the coastline, and as each canoe moved along the water, it became a messenger gliding through the world's natural currents. Songs carried information just as stories did. Some songs described events so clearly that even those who never witnessed them could feel their impact. A particular melody might indicate a prosperous season, a memorable gathering, a tale from ancestors, gratitude for the sea's generosity. Songs traveled effortlessly. Once heard, they wove themselves into memory, carried along the coast by those who found meaning in their words. A traveler might arrive in a distant community singing a tune first sung hundreds of miles away, a gentle reminder that ideas traveled even when people didn't. The ocean also helped carry news of danger.
Storm warnings. A traveler who saw storm patterns in the north warned communities to the south. They described cloud shapes, wind smells, and the behavior of wildlife. Their warnings were not dramatic or urgent. They were calm, measured, and based on long observation. Communities listened. They secured shelters. They prepared for changing tides, changes in fishing grounds. If fish migrated earlier or later than expected, travelers shared this information. Communities adjusted their gathering patterns, ensuring no one faced shortages. Shifts in landscape. The coast changes constantly.
River mouths shift, sandbars move, new hazards emerge. Travelers who noticed these changes described them carefully, drawing them in the sand or tracing outlines with shells. The sea may shift, but information helped people adapt. Seasonal gatherings, peaceful, unhurried, deeply communal, were essential for sharing news. These gatherings strengthened cultural bonds and ensured that knowledge traveled across distances. Here, news spread in layers, like ripples in a pool. 1. Elders shared stories of past seasons. 2. Travelers shared observations from their journeys. 3. Families shared updates about community events. 4. Craft workers shared new techniques. 5. Navigators shared information about stars, tides, and weather. No one commanded these exchanges. They happened naturally as people sat near fires, prepared meals, repaired nets, or watched the night sky. By the end of each gathering, everyone returned home carrying news to share with others along their path. At night, the sea played its own role in carrying news. Travelers resting by the shore listened to the water, the rhythm of waves, the whisper of wind through grasses, the distant calls of birds settling for the night. These sounds reminded them of places they had visited. A quiet cove might recall a story someone shared. The pitch of waves might remind them of a northern bay. The shimmer of starlight on the water echoed memories of conversations held during late-night paddling. Night linked places through memory and imagination. Travelers drifted into sleep carrying stories like treasures to be delivered at the next sunrise. Over generations, this gentle system of communication shaped coastal culture. Communities came to expect news not quickly, but meaningfully. They valued accuracy over speed, patience over urgency, and understanding over reaction. In this way, news became more than facts. It became relationship, threads connecting communities who shared the same coast, the same sea, the same world. People understood that sharing news was not a task, it was an act of care. Throughout it all, the ocean remained as it had always been, steady, patient, endlessly moving. It did not rush travelers. It did not hurry messages. It taught people to trust the slow currents of communication. Through this rhythm, the coastline became a connected world, quiet but vibrant, calm but alive with meaning. Today, messages travel instantly across the globe. Yet the wisdom of ancient coastal communication still carries meaning. Take time to understand, listen deeply, share thoughtfully, trust the process. Move with the natural rhythm rather than fight it. Standing at the shore of the Atlantic on a calm evening, listening to waves roll in soft succession, one can sense the ancient flow of news that once moved along these waters. The waves that reach the sand today have touched countless shores, countless moments. They carry no spoken messages, yet the feeling remains that the sea connects us.
That information moves best when shared with care. That stories, like waves, are meant to travel. And so the coastline remembers. News traveled once not with noise, but with calm intention. Not with urgency, but with trust. Not with machinery, but with the ancient heartbeat of the sea. The waves were the messengers, and they carried everything that mattered. Before lanterns lit harbor towns, before ships charted the ocean with compass and sextant, before lighthouses flashed their beams across restless waters, there were moonlit journeys. Nighttime travel along the ancient American coastline was not a danger to fear, but a quiet ritual shaped by the silver glow of the moon, the whisper of waves, and the calm guidance of stars. Under moonlight, the coastline became softer, gentler, its landmarks traced not in sharp daylight, but in cool, shimmering outlines. For the earliest travelers along the Atlantic, night was not an obstacle. It was an ally, a companion, a peaceful time to travel when the world rested and the sea seemed to breathe in harmony with those who glided upon it. This is the story of those moonlit journeys, unhurried, graceful, and wrapped in the kind of quiet that soothes the spirit. When the sun dipped beyond the horizon, the coastline shifted from a world of bright detail to a landscape shaped by silhouettes and silver light. The transition was slow, never abrupt. The sky softened into hues of lavender and indigo. Waves took on deeper shades, rolling like dark silk. Marsh grasses appeared as gentle shadows, swaying in rhythm with the wind. Stars emerged, one by one, like pinpricks of light woven into the night's tapestry. But the moon, when full or nearly full, was the true guide. It rose with quiet majesty, casting a pale, glowing path across the water. Travelers called this path the Moon's Road, a ribbon of soft light stretching from horizon to boat, inviting movement across the calm night sea. Nighttime journeys were not merely practical, they were often preferred. Cooler temperatures. In warm seasons, traveling under the moon spared travelers from the heat of day. The night air carried cool breezes from the water, refreshing and gentle on tired bodies. Calmer waters. Many nights brought peaceful winds and glassy waters. Without midday gusts or afternoon storms, canoes glided with ease, their paddles dipping silently. Better visibility along the shore. Though counterintuitive, some coastline features were easier to spot at night. Dunes glowing softly in moonlight. The pale line where waves reached the sand. White shells sparkling like tiny stars. The moon gave its own kind of clarity. The gift of time. Daylight hours were precious for gathering, crafting, preparing food, and building shelters. Travel often fit best into the night when the world grew still. Night was the time of movement. Day was the time of living. Travelers did not decide lightly to journey at night. Preparation was done with the same slow care that defined all ancient coastal life. Watching the moon. The phase of the moon dictated the journey. A full moon meant long, bright visibility. A half moon provided enough light to guide boats through sheltered waters. A new moon meant staying ashore unless absolutely necessary. Listening to the sea. Travelers listened to the sea's voice before launching. If waves crashed loudly, they waited. If they heard steady, rhythmic patterns, they launched. Studying the wind. A soft breeze was welcomed. A shifting, unpredictable wind
meant postponing the trip until safer conditions. Preparing the canoe. Boats were inspected, hulls smoothed, bindings checked, paddles polished, goods securely tied. Everything needed to move quietly, efficiently. Gathering companions. Rarely did a traveler journey alone at night. Groups of 2 or 3 canoes created safety, companionship, and shared guidance. By the time the moon rose high, the travelers were ready, calm, patient, trusting of the sea. Stepping into a canoe under moonlight was an experience in itself. The sand felt cool beneath bare feet. The water lapped gently at the hull. The moon painted the surface in long beams of pale silver. Travelers pushed off softly, allowing the tide to take them for a brief moment before dipping their paddles into the still water. The familiar hush, hush, hush of each stroke echoed across the quiet coastline. Once away from shore, the world grew wonderfully vast. Stars reflected in the water. The moon guided the bow, and the night wrapped them in peace. On moonlit nights, the horizon blurred into a seamless band of silver and charcoal, a serene world of gentle contrasts.
Not all nighttime travel was done by water. Some journeys followed the beach or forest paths parallel to the coast. Along the beach, sand cooled by night made for comfortable walking. Travelers moved with the rhythm of waves beside them. The tide, guided by the moon, offered firm sand perfect for steady steps. Night travel by beach had its own beauty. Phosphorescent gleams in wet sand, crabs scuttling in the moonlight, the soothing roar of distant surf. Through forest paths, forests softened into deep blue shadows. The moon peeked through leaves, creating flickering patches of light on the ground. Travelers walked carefully but calmly, guided by familiar landmarks. Nighttime land routes were slower but deeply peaceful. The sky served as a natural compass. The North Star, always steady, always patient, it anchored direction no matter how dark the night became. Constellations marked seasons and pathways, offshore routes, river mouths, shallow coves, rocky headlands to avoid. Travelers did not rush. They followed stars the way one follows a gentle melody. At night, sound became the traveler's companion. Without daytime noise, the coastline revealed its secrets through soft, meaningful cues. Waves on different shorelines. The pitch of breaking waves changed based on geography. Rocky coasts made sharper sounds. Sandy shores whispered softly. Marshes muffled the sea's voice. Experienced travelers learned to hear their location. Birds in the dark. Even nighttime birds offered guidance. Their calls signaled shallow waters. Their silence sometimes warned of approaching storms. The movement of wind through grass. Grasses near coastal paths rustled differently depending on direction and terrain. To ancient travelers, the nighttime coastline was not dark or mysterious. It was deeply alive with subtle messages. Moonlit journeys were not always constant paddling. Travelers valued rest as part of travel. Sometimes they stopped their paddles entirely and let the tide carry them. During these pauses, the boat barely rocked. The water mirror reflected the sky. A calmness settled into the bones.
A traveler might look up and see constellations shimmering in absolute clarity. They might lower their gaze to the water and see stars reflected there too, like traveling between two skies. These moments of stillness were sacred, soothing, and restorative. Nighttime journeys often led to peaceful encounters with others, one canoe passing another. If another group traveled nearby, they acknowledged each other with soft gestures, a lifted paddle, a quiet greeting in the moonlight, a shared smile in the moonlight. Meetings at sheltered spots. Travelers sometimes arrived at the same harbor or sandbar unexpectedly. They shared food warmed over a small fire, talked softly, then continued their separate journeys when ready. Community thrived even in the stillness of night. Arriving at a secluded harbor in the dark had its own enchantment. The water inside the harbor reflected the moon like a polished stone. Trees encircled the cove in silent silhouettes. The air felt cool and safe, as if the land itself offered shelter. Travelers pulled their canoes onto the shore and rested, listening to the harbor's quiet breathing. Fires were rarely needed. Moonlight provided enough glow to unwind, settle, and prepare for morning. It was in these peaceful harbors that many stories were told, many songs sung, and many friendships deepened.
Nighttime travel also held emotional and spiritual meaning. Travelers use these moments to reflect on their connection to the sea, the guidance of nature, the lessons taught by elders, the stories carried across generations. Moonlight softened worries. Stars offered clarity. The sea carried whispers of ancient wisdom. In this calm environment, even long journeys felt like blessings rather than burdens. After hours of moonlit travel, dawn arrived gently. The sky shifted from blue-black to pale gray. The first hints of orange appeared on the horizon. Birds stirred. The world awakened. For travelers, dawn signaled time to rest, time to gather food, time to drink fresh water, time to reflect on the night's journey. The transition from moonlight to morning light felt natural, like turning a page in a long, peaceful story. Even centuries later, the memory of moonlit journeys remains woven into the coastline, in quiet coves that glow under a full moon, in gently curving beaches perfect for nighttime travel, in stars that rise and set over the Atlantic in eternal rhythm, in the calm energy that lingers along the shore each night. Modern travelers may not paddle by moonlight or walk long beaches in the dark, but the spirit of those journeys remains. The coastline still whispers, slow down, listen, trust the night, follow the light that guides, gently, not urgently. Moonlit journeys were not about reaching a destination quickly. They were about traveling in harmony with nature. The moon offered visibility, guidance, peace, reflection, connection. The sea offered rhythm, movement, mystery, belonging. Together, they created a world where travelers felt not alone, but held, supported by the vast, calm beauty of the night. And as long as the moon continues to rise over the Atlantic, that ancient magic remains, ready to soothe anyone who pauses long enough to see the shimmering path it paints upon the water. Before highways traced the edges of the continent, before bustling ports and glowing cities marked the shoreline, before the United States took shape as a nation, there were ancient paths along the Atlantic coast, paths walked by countless generations, paths carved gently by footsteps, tides, and the slow, patient rhythms of life by the sea.
paths that still linger in the quiet folds of the land, shaping the America we know today in ways both subtle and profound. This final story is about those paths, how they were formed, how they guided early coastal peoples, and how their influence endures in the towns, traditions, and memories of today's America. It is a story of continuity, of echoes, and of a coastline that has never once stopped breathing. The Atlantic coastline has changed shape many times through millennia. Ice sheets retreated, rivers rearranged themselves, and rising seas carved new inlets. Yet through every shift, people adapted, following the contours of bays, beaches, marshlands, and forests. The earliest coastal communities understood the shoreline not as a boundary, but as a companion. They learned to walk with it, to travel beside it, to listen to its movements. In doing so, they shaped paths that served as the foundation for later routes used by settlers, traders, explorers, and eventually the nation itself. Millions of footsteps, bare feet, woven shoes, soft moccasins, pressed into the same living ground that highways and boardwalks now trace. The land remembers. Long before roads existed, travel along the eastern seaboard followed predictable patterns shaped by the landscape. Beach paths. Hard-packed sand at low tide offered long, smooth walkways stretching for miles. These paths connected communities separated by dunes, river mouths, and marshlands. Forest trails parallel to the shore. Just beyond the dunes, forest paths provided shade from the sun. These became safe routes during storms or when tides ran high. Tidal rivers as natural corridors. Rivers flowing inland served as gateways to fresh water, resources, and distant communities. Canoes glided along their calm surface, linking the coast to the interior.
Barrier islands as seasonal roads. Some coastal groups traveled along barrier islands, thin strips of land buffering the mainland from the sea. These islands provided abundant resources and clear vantage points. These routes, though unmarked and unpaved, were consistent for centuries. Travelers passed knowledge of them from one generation to the next with gentle precision. And remarkably, many of today's modern routes, from scenic highway systems to nature trails to maritime shipping lanes, still echo these ancient paths. Many small towns along the East Coast grew upon places where ancient gathering sites once flourished. Though their names changed and their architecture transformed over time, the essence remained. Safe harbors, rich estuaries, access to fresh water, elevated ground above storm surge, natural protection from winds. These factors shaped the earliest settlements, and they continue to influence America's coastal geography today. Modern coastal towns, places known for calm beaches, historic districts, and fishing piers, stand where communities once met to trade shells, herbs, and stories under the open sky. The coastline gently guided America's earliest urban patterns long before such ideas were ever studied or mapped. Ancient pathways were not just for goods, they were for ideas, traditions, and cultural exchanges. Over thousands of years, knowledge flowed along the coast just as steadily as water. These cultural exchanges laid the foundation for shared harvesting practices, communal respect for the sea, navigational traditions based on stars and tides, techniques for building boats, shelters, and tools, storytelling that reinforced identity and unity. Even today, coastal America reflects these roots in subtle ways. Coastal food traditions. Many dishes and preparation methods echo ancient practices. Fish smoked or dried, shellfish gathered at low tide, herbs flavored by brackish marshlands. Maritime craftsmanship. Wooden boats, though now often decorative, still honor the design principles of ancient vessels built from cedar, pine, and birch. Community gatherings.
Seasonal festivals, coastal markets, and seafood celebrations echoed the traditions of ancient communal exchanges. Language and place names. Some words used along the coast preserve echoes of languages spoken long before European arrival. The coastline, in essence, knit together a cultural fabric that still influences the nation's identity. Walk along certain stretches of East Coast shoreline and you can feel it. In the shape of a dune that guides your footsteps. In a quiet cove whose calmness mirrors ancient harbors. In a quiet freshwater trickle where marsh meets sea. In the pattern of tidal pools forming familiar shapes. Nature carries memory without needing words. Many wildlife corridors today mimic old human travel routes. Birds, fish, and mammals follow the same rhythms as ancient peoples, guided by tides, seasons, and the pull of the moon. The coastline remains a living archive, a place where the past folds gently into the present. Though built with machines rather than footsteps, certain modern routes trace patterns remarkably similar to ancient ones. Scenic coastal highways follow natural contours that once guided travelers on foot or by canoe. Boardwalks and promenades follow shoreline edges shaped by tides for thousands of years. Inland bypass roads mirror forest trails once used to avoid storms or strong winds. Without realizing it, millions of people drive daily along paths shaped not by urban planners, but by early coastal communities responding to nature. The ancient coastline still whispers directions. Safe harbors remain as essential today as they were centuries ago. Where ancient travelers once took refuge from storms, modern vessels now anchor beneath glowing marina lights. Where canoes once rested on soft sand, boats now dock along piers. Though the materials have changed, wood replaced by steel, woven sails replaced by engines, the need for sanctuary remains unchanged. Human beings still seek calm during storms, rest during long journeys, connection with others, and assurance that the sea can be both powerful and gentle. Secluded harbors continue to offer that sanctuary, just as they did for generations long past. Though centuries have passed, the influence of ancient coastal life continues to shape American culture in subtle, beautiful ways. Respect for the ocean. Many coastal families carry deep traditions of honoring the sea, recognizing its balance of generosity and unpredictability. Love of coastal landscapes. Millions of Americans seek peace along beaches, dunes, and tide pools, landscapes that shape the earliest coastal paths. Storytelling traditions. Tales of the sea, the moon, and the coastline remain central themes in American folklore, art, and music.
Sense of exploration. Just as ancient travelers paddled into new waters, guided by stars and intuition, Americans today carry a cultural instinct for curiosity and discovery. Community bonds. Coastal towns often maintain strong communal identities, reflecting ancient cooperation built around gathering, travel, and trade. The coastline's influence lingers in ways both visible and invisible. The earliest coastal communities knew the ocean as a teacher. It taught patience through tides. It taught observation through weather. It taught humility through storms. It taught connection through travel. It taught gratitude through harvests. Today, the sea continues to teach those same lessons. Walk along the Atlantic coast and listen. You will hear its ancient wisdom in the rolling waves. You will feel its calm in the soft push of the tide. You will see its history reflected in the landscape. The coastline is not merely a boundary. It is a living presence that shapes anyone who chooses to walk beside it. Even those who do not live by the coast feel the lineage of these ancient paths. Because the coastline shaped early communities, and early communities shaped the nation, many American values echo ancient coastal life. Resilience,
learning to adapt like those who lived with ever-changing tides. Innovation, crafting solutions with the materials at hand. Cooperation, building community through sharing and kindness. Curiosity, exploring what lies beyond the horizon. Gratitude, appreciating the gifts of the natural world. These values, carried quietly through generations, have become part of the American character. The ocean's rhythm, even from afar, influences the national heartbeat. If one walks along the Atlantic shoreline today, early morning, when light drapes softly across the water, it becomes clear. The coastline is eternal. People change. Communities rise and fall. Harbors grow busy or quiet. Boats evolve from bark and cedar to steel and fiberglass. But the essence of the coast endures. It continues to guide travel, shape settlement, inspire stories, nurture culture, offer sanctuary, spark imagination. Ancient paths may not appear on modern maps, but they exist in the subtle ways we move, live, and remember. Imagine now a single person standing at the shoreline. The sand beneath their feet is soft and cool. The waves approach with steady, timeless rhythm. The distant horizon shimmers. The sky opens wide. They are standing on a path walked by countless ancestors, people who listened to the tides, trusted the coastline, and shaped a world that continues to unfold today. Every grain of sand, every ripple of water, every curve of the land holds memory. And in that moment of stillness, one can feel the connection, past and present meeting at the water's edge, ancient movement guiding modern life, a coastline that has never stopped whispering its gentle wisdom. The Atlantic reaches forward and backward at once, a bridge across centuries, a mirror of endurance, a reminder that America's story began not just on land, but along the quiet, ancient paths carved softly by the sea. Those paths remain, and they continue to shape us patiently, peacefully, eternally.